France is not alone. There seems to be no respite to ongoing protests against judicial reforms in Israel. Now, bending to a wave of mass protests, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed his contentious judicial overhaul plan yesterday, said he wanted to avoid a civil war in his country. In his primetime address, Netanyahu, who had previously rejected calls to delay the legislation, took a more conciliatory tone. He acknowledged deep divisions in the country and said he was hitting the pause button to prevent a rift in the nation. The announcement appeared to calm some of the tensions that have fueled 3 months of tumultuous unrest. There has been a surge of dissent amongst members of his own party, in fact, and tensions rose after Netanyahu abruptly fired his defense minister over his opposition to the planned overhaul, prompting mass street protests and widespread strike action.
Out of national responsibility, out of the desire to prevent a rift in the nation, I decided to suspend the second and third reading of the law in this session of the Knesset, to give time to try and reach the same broad agreement in preparation for the legislation during the next Knesset. Either way, we will bring a reform that will restore the balance that was lost between the authorities, while preserving, and I would add, even in strengthening the rights of the individual.
Take a look at the reform that is rocking Israel. The reforms are supposed to change the composition of the panel appointing judges. Seems very close to home, doesn't it? The panel was expanded from 9 to 11 after changes. The government-nominated members would now have 7-4 majority. According to the bill, the government wants Parliament to be able to override any SC judgment. The Parliament can override a judgment by a majority of 61 votes. Proposed bill seeks to scrap the test of reasonability. The Parliament will also get power to pass laws which were previously ruled invalid by courts. While the reforms have been pegged back now, Netanyahu has been a very vocal proponent of them, of course. He says that he's been batting for these reforms because the Supreme Court doesn't represent the Israeli people anymore. The SC, he says, is overstepping its role, getting into issues it shouldn't rule on. People voted politicians to power and not Supreme Court judges, he says. Politicians in countries like US control appointment of judges. The Supreme Court shouldn't interfere in the will of the people. Like I said, this is an issue that will seem closer to home, given that the Indian government has also been kick-starting a campaign, a debate on how Indian judges should be appointed and who should have the last say, and especially on judicial overreach too. Now, the opposition to these proposed reforms is also great in Israel. This is primarily what those opposed say, that this overhaul goes too far, that it will completely destroy the judiciary. The reforms will harm the independence of the judiciary as well. The judicial reforms may put the civil and minority rights at risk in Israel. Only a minority of Israelis support the reforms, while the vast majority want a compromise to be reached. As of now, 3 corruption cases against Netanyahu are also under trial, where he faces charges of fraud, bribery and breach of trust. Opponents believe that these judicial reforms are meant as an escape route for Netanyahu himself. Take a look at how the world is reacting to the decision to slow down in Israel and the reform itself. So, for example, US has welcomed the halt, saying this is an opportunity to create additional time for a compromise. UK has also welcomed the delay, saying it is vital that the shared democratic values are upheld, while the UN has slammed the reforms itself, saying judicial plans will drastically undermine judiciary's independence.